What's happening, everybody? My name is John here with Studio J, and today I'm going to bring you my first game review for Alien Isolation. Probably one of my favorite horror games of all time, probably one of the only horror games that has actually done well and I think will stand the test of time. But I'll be explaining that later on in my review. What I'm going to be doing with my game reviews and movie reviews is I'm going to be going off of a 5-star system. For the games, I'm going to be discussing how well it fits into the genre. Second, how well the characters in the game are and the gameplay is for the game. Third, the story of the game. Fourth, what the actual game itself entails and what future the game could possibly bring, maybe sequels. And then fifth and finally, just my overall feelings for the game, which will be like the overall score of the game on a 5-star system. But then going into this game, I saw the first Alien movie whenever I was like 7 years old, and I've been in love with the franchise ever since. As I got older, I realized the major flaws within 3 and Resurrection, and have also decided, hey, I'm one of these people that doesn't like this because of how unlike the actual series it is. But then going into amazing movies like Prometheus and now Alien Covenant also, I'm happy to be awaiting Ridley Scott's finale for this new trilogy of Alien movies for my generation. But I'm now finally actually getting into the game itself, Alien Isolation. This game is amazing. We kind of get it's like a prequel, it's like a sequel prequel that takes place in between Alien and Aliens, where we get to follow um Ellen Ripley, Ellen's daughter, who is amazing. And the only problem is with this game is there's one continuity error, I think, and that's just that purely I think that they actually make no mention of there being any survivors. I think they said there was no survivors. They have no mention of like Ripley actually escaping, or like I think they have that all the escape pods are still there in the game. I'm not for sure. I'm gonna have to go back and look on that and maybe post a follow-up video to this. But otherwise, sticking to continuity, I think it does well and treats the aliens very much like how they're treated within the first movie, and that's like barely showing them. Like we don't get something like a normal slasher movie to where we see too many scenes featuring the main villain in this game or like the main thing. It gives a sense of dread and this sense of, as the title of the game states, isolation. We end up seeing this monster only right when it's about to kill us or while it's stalking us. The point of the game is to try to hide and make it to the level, and I can say I died countless times. Like, I will admit it, this game is not for the easy of heart. If you're going into this expecting not to die, you are going to be in for a bad time. Like, and besides that, like, we get androids that look a little bit different from the movies. I kind of like how they have a generic look. They didn't have to try to make them look superhuman because they just needed a generic, like, NPC villain besides the alien. But what the game developers did with the alien, I think, is magical. They put it on its own AI system of code to where it actually learns from your moves that you make in the game. It's almost like you are playing chess with the game developers while you're playing the game. Because the alien actually learns that by like the coding like senses where you hid or like how you react each time the alien shows up, and then it makes the alien look around in those areas more often. Or like if it can tell that you're going more, like traveling more in the vents instead of out in the open, as the alien starts showing up in the vent system, almost an immediate kill, might I add. So like, my advice, never take the vents, but but then going onward to just this game alone, it is beautiful. It is so beautiful, and I think it just stands the test of time so well, just like the original Alien movie by Ridley Scott. We get to see this xenomorph to where there's barely any of it, and then towards the ending, the only thing I have a problem with, besides that continuity error that I mentioned earlier, is that towards the ending, that we see it cuts off very abruptly. Spoiler alert, but a major spoiler for the ending. We see that Alan Ripley is impregnated by an alien, by a xenomorph face hugger, or it's implied because we see her wake up and one fall away from her face after a cutscene. And then it shows aliens, they stalk you, but they never actually try to kill you anymore for the game. So it's implied, just like from the movie series, that she's impregnated by one. My problem with this is, like, they never imply that she's about to get chest bursted or that, something's going to happen to her. It shows her setting the ship to self destruct, and it shows her getting into an escape pod, and then it cuts away. That's all it does. It ends up cutting away before we actually get a firm ending of, like, hey, she actually was that, and the facehugger just didn't die prematurely, I'm guessing is the best way to say that. That it just didn't fall off, like how we kind of see in, I think a good example of that is Alien 3, that pretty much as soon as the facehugger leaves the egg, that if it doesn't attach right away, it's going to die within minutes. And I think a good example of this, once again, is in Aliens, whenever, spoiler alert for these movies, also, by the way, sorry for not having that ahead of time, is that we see whenever Burke traps these facehuggers in the room with Ripley and Newt, that one of them is starting to slow down and seem to almost die of, like, old age before it ends up getting killed. And I don't know. The two major problems, like that continuity and then the ending being so abrupt. I mean, I think they made the ending abrupt mainly just to try to, oh, maybe we could have a sequel. But the thing is, Alien Isolation, I think, should probably stand on its own as its own solo game and not try to make a series. Because if you look, any of these games that have a series around them that are kind of like Alien Isolation, like a good example of a game that's a little bit like it but not really is, as much as I hate to say it, the Five Nights at Freddy franchise. Like, the first one I think is amazing, and I still go back to it every so often, because just like the game, it has this sense of dread. You never know when an animatronic is going to come and get you, if it is. The problem is they kept on extending out this franchise. They really changed nothing about it. I think in one of the latest ones, you can walk around the house and you have to shut doors, but there's literally no way of preventing them anymore. But the thing is that I think it's an amazing game. And it's going to be one of the best games of this generation, I think. A good game, I would say, to compare it to within, like, difficulty setting, but it's still being a noteworthy game that'll stand the test of time. I think a good example of this is Contra, like the classic NES game, because as we see with that game, it is still one of the most difficult games to date unless you use the Konami code. But with Contra, it was so challenging, and you died so much in it, to where the point of the game was to survive and get to the end of the level. And it may have been a side-scroller that you didn't need things like stealth or hiding to get through. But to the point to where, like, you end up having to try to go through this, to where if you don't have a friend playing with you, it's nearly impossible. That this game, like, replicates. And I think with it being, like, having this more, like, storyline, like, it has a little bit of a story, but most of the story is just you going throughout the Nostromo, which I would love to be back in the Nostromo. It gave that same feeling of being in the game, like how Ridley Scott filmed the first Alien movie, to where you felt like you were part of the crew, like you were walking around the Nostromo with them. But then also going off of that, I think that it's very repetitive gameplay. It's mainly just going point to point, avoiding the alien. But it's still a beautiful game. The artwork is absolutely amazing. You can find concept art as collectibles throughout the levels, besides having, like, to build the gear from blueprints. You get some iconic images from the movie. Like, there's iconic xenomorph kills that are straight ripped from the movies, and they do have some new ones too. Like, they actually have a new one to where if the xenomorph is right behind you in a vent and you're running from it, you can be standing up right when you get out of the vent, and you think you're safe for a minute, and you have time to hide before it gets out. But it has a kill to where it lashes out its tail, wraps it around one of your legs, and pulls you into the vent to kill you. And I think that's like a very unique like kill. Like it gives that sense of dread also, because you think that, oh, I finally escaped before it actually ends up killing you then. But overall, I'm going to have to say, story-wise, I would give this game probably a 3 out of 5 stars. It has a little bit of a story towards the beginning, but then after that, there's really no story at all until you get to like the final few cutscenes. All it is just you going back and forth between like through the Nostromo. Then probably going on the playability of this game, I will give a 4.5 out of 5 right now because of how it just, even though it's very repetitive gameplay, because of how difficult the game actually is, because you can actually get lost on the ship easily too, which makes it even harder to survive. But based on how hard the game is and having it come back to it, and I still come back to it to this day, I got it right after it came out, I still think that because of how difficult it is and how like dreadful and how suspenseful the game is and how kind of faithful to the survivability it actually would be for a normal person in the situation of the movies, that I would say, yeah, definitely a 4.5 out of 5. I think it's not as playable as some other games, mainly more multiplayer games. Like, I think maybe have a multiplayer aspect to where it's like you have a crew like in the first movie, and then you have one person who's a xenomorph that has to hunt them all down. Because that would be an interesting aspect to the game, because it would have. I'm not. There are some games that I think should have multiplayer and some that shouldn't. There are some games that I think the only thing that saved them was multiplayer also, like Arkham Origins, but I'll get into that at another time. But I think the one thing that could have made it even better playability-wise is having multiplayer, as I mentioned. Going into the artwork then, I think that the artwork in this game is absolutely beautiful. Like, it's one of my, like, favorite artistic directions because it very much looks like they consulted and had H.H. Geiger design all of the, like, artwork and all the surroundings and everything for them, and they just coded in his designs. Especially, like, taking some iconic rooms out of the movie. Like, I think one of the opening shots in the movie, too, whenever you're on the Nostromo and you're looking, you actually walk into the dining area, and you can see, like, the little, like, liquid bird. I always forget, the liquid dynamics bird that they have in at least once in each and every Alien movie by Ridley Scott. Just bobbing back and forth still like it was at the end of the first movie. And I think that's kind of cool that we get like little nods to the first movie like that. There's a moment whenever we see Alan find Ellen's like tattered uniform, which kind of I think implies that something happened to her. But the way that the game goes, and I think they didn't notice this until it was too late, is that they ended up showing no sign. Like, they actually made it look a lot like Sigourney Weaver's character, Ellen, died at the end of the first movie, even though she didn't. The problem with the artwork, though, I think, is that, once again, it gets very repetitive. And, I mean, like, there's some stuff, like, there's not, like, all the doorways throughout the game look different. There's not really any minute differences towards the end until the ship starts getting severely infected by xenomorphs. You see more stuff like slime and just like dried and caked slime and all this, like in some fire, blocking different paths in the game. But you see this stuff, and like there's some of the stuff that's very generic. Like, you get really cool tiling on the floor. I will say a lot of stuff was put into great detail, but is some stuff that I think is lacking. So I think it's still a 5 to me, and I think barely a 5, but it's still definitely 5. And then also, going into it, continuity and possibly a sequel, I would say I give this a 3.5 stars out of 5, mainly because, as I said, they try to open it up for a sequel, and I don't think a game like this should have one, as I mentioned with Five Nights at Freddy's being a good example of why. I think that it stays very continuity driven, except for, as I mentioned multiple times, about them implying that Ripley died. Like the movie Ripley died, not her daughter. But, and then also just like how there's some stuff like they could have gone off of the movie with it, but there was, I feel like they went off of the movie more for the location and nothing else. Because besides it being the same company that sends Alan out to go investigate with her crew, we mainly just see that it's the same company and the same ship, and not really. Actually, I'd probably, and that's really the only things that they actually mention, like with that being the story, besides her being her daughter. And I think, I mean, and like the main argument people usually have on this is that with her daughter more than likely dying from a chest burster, they mention in the second movie Aliens, once again by Ridley Scott, not by Ridley Scott, by James Cameron, sorry, but by James Cameron, that her daughter died of cancer. But as we all well know, anyone in the who's fans of the Alien franchise and watches the movies knows that Weyland Yutani, the main company, ends up lying blatantly to people. They blatantly lied to Ripley in the second movie to have her go along on the trip so they can study these creatures more before they brought them back for research. They lied about the team going out in the first Alien movie, even that they were actually going out just to find an alien specimen to bring back in research. I don't think the company's really involved that much in the third and Resurrection. We see that they lied in Prometheus, though, majorly with why David is actually there. And then also, I think them lying about. I don't think they really lied in Covenant that badly. I just think that it seems shady because the company stops feeding them information once they realize they're in danger. Like, I think the company itself is the main antagonist, even though we see, like, the alien, like, throughout the series, though, we see aliens kill people. Xenomorphs, neomorphs, whatever you want to call them. Even the engineers in Prometheus. But we see them kill people. What I'm saying is with this, we get the same common antagonist. I think we get the company and the company and the xenomorph and Alien Isolation. And I mean, I like that, but once again, they don't really mention much to the movies. They don't really connect it to the movies. It's its own standalone thing, while it's also trying to say that it's not. And that, for me, just a problem. 3.5 stars. So total with that 3.5 stars for continuity and sequel wise, for the 5 stars for artwork just being amazing, 3 stars definitely for the gameplay value, but then the replayability being a 4.5. I would definitely say that Alien overall, Alien Isolation to me overall is 4 stars out of 5, and that's mainly just because of things like I mentioned, like they try to almost force it down your throat, like, hey, we're going to end it abruptly like this, leave it to where you don't know what happens, so you can try to be waiting for a sequel that I don't think will come out, and the company would be smart for not letting it come out. But like I mentioned, there are amazing things in it, like the artwork is. The controls are kind of easy, but there are some of them that are a little confusing towards the beginning for people who don't go into the game with any previous knowledge. Like the stealth mechanic is a little confusing with the game because they kind of just drop the xenomorph in there and tell you, hey, you need to survive, and they just assume that you already know how to. But overall, like I said, I think Alien Isolation is a 4 out of 5 stars, and why I think it is a go-to game if you are big fans of the Alien franchise, like mainly the Ridley Scott movies than Ridley Scott and James Cameron than anyone else. But then also, if you're just a fan of horror games in general, like and more games I'm going to be covering soon, hopefully, are going to be games like Friday the 13th and other ones that are within this horror franchise, maybe Resident Evil and some Silent Hill games also. But mainly Alien Isolation, I think, is good as a standalone game, but they try to force it down your throats. Like it's its own like separate universe and things, even though we already got confirmation that it was supposed to be completely canon to and faithful to the material. But like I said, 4 out of 5 stars. It's an amazing game, and I'm definitely going to be going back to play it sometime soon.